Hello and welcome to Spinster's Kitchen. I'm Claudia and today I'm going to try and follow a cake recipe from 1897. I'm going to try and follow a recipe from the April edition of Hearth and Home magazine published in London in 1897. I'm a very confident baker. I'm pretty good at baking. I have a good baking instinct and I have a lot of experience in baking, but this is going to be a challenge and you'll see why when I show you the recipe. So let's just have a quick look at the entire chocolate cake recipe. And here it is. This is from a section of the magazine that seems to be reader submissions, and it reads, "Here is an excellent recipe for little chocolate cakes. Work 1/4 pound of butter into a cream, add 1 ounce of powdered chocolate and 2 ounces of caster sugar. Work together for 10 minutes, then mix in 2 eggs and 2 ounces of fine flour, and work again for 10 minutes. Bake in small cake tins for 20 minutes. If you've ever followed a cake recipe, you might notice a few oddities here. First of all, there is no baking powder in this recipe, and that's not because it wasn't available in 1897. Baking powder became widely available and popular in the second half of the 19th century, and in fact in this very magazine there are other recipes that do use baking powder, but this isn't one of them. The second issue is that it doesn't tell you how many small cakes this actually makes, so I'm going to have a little bit of a guess. Based on the fact that these only bake for 20 minutes, I'm guessing that they're going to be quite small cakes. So I've got a muffin tin here and some cupcake liners, paper liners, just to make sure that nothing sticks. And then the third issue is that there's no temperature. If you can hear a humming noise in the background, that's my oven preheating. I am heating it up to 160 degrees fan. Oh, that, by the way, is the fridge starting to come back on. Great timing. Always such great timing. I swear every time I do a video in the kitchen, the fridge is very noisy in the background. But there isn't really much I can do about it, so let's just try and deal with it. So it is a little bit of a strange, very short recipe, very low on detail. The other thing that you might notice is that it gives you very long amounts of time that you're beating and whisking this recipe, and that's obviously because there was no electric whisk available to housewives in 1897, and I'm going to stick to that, so I'm going to be whisking everything by hand. Let's just get right into it and we'll see how I get on. So the first line is work 1/4 pound of butter into a cream. I've already weighed out my butter. 1/4 pound is, I think, something like 113 grams. So I weighed that out and then I left the butter on the counter for a few hours to come to room temperature because, well, I'm not trying to whisk cold butter by hand. It's already going to be quite heavy on my poor little muscles. It says work 1/4 pound of butter into a cream. So I'm assuming that just means until it's soft and creamy and until I've managed to whip a little bit of air into this. I'm going to be doing this while standing up. As you can tell, all of the butter is now just kind of stuck in the whisk. Okay, so now my whisk is actually falling apart. Okay, I give up on that step. Every time I try and whisk this, all that happens is that the whisk just kind of absorbs all of the butter, even though the butter is very, very soft. So, we're just going to move on to the next step, and I have a feeling that Victorian housewives will be very disappointed with me, and I also have a feeling that these cakes might turn out somewhat stodgy because I've not already in the first step failed to adequately aerate this batter. The next step is add 1 ounce of powdered chocolate and 2 ounces of caster sugar. Now powdered chocolate, I'm just going to assume is the same as modern day cocoa. So I've weighed out 1 ounce, which I think is 28 grams of chocolate, and 2 ounces of sugar, which is 56 grams of chocolate. So let's add those. So far, in terms of steps, this is quite similar to what you would do normally if you make cupcakes, although normally in a modern recipe you would have the cocoa added in the step after this with the flour and the eggs. So you'd whisk together the sugar and the butter and then add the cocoa in the next step. Oh wow, this is a dry, powdery mess. Let's see if we can get this incorporated at all by hand. Clearly there is some amount of patience required here, and in fact the recipe says work together for 10 minutes before you get to the next step. So I'm going to put my Jane Eyre audiobook on and actually time 10 minutes and just whisk and whisk and whisk until these ingredients become a smooth batter, hopefully with lots of air in, because that's what makes the cake light and fluffy in the end. It's now been 10 minutes and I can't, my arms are already jelly. But if you look at the consistency, it is now much smoother. It's very soft and it doesn't stick as much to the whisk anymore. So that's good. These Victorian housewives really had some strong arms, very, very clearly. As I was whisking and musing on the subject of Victorian chocolate cakes, I thought that actually this recipe, rather than the recipe for cake, reminds me a lot of a recipe for brownies, because in brownies typically you don't use baking powder, and in brownies you have a very large amount of cocoa as opposed to flour. So this recipe uses 1 ounce of cocoa and 2 ounces of flour, so it should turn out very, very dark and chocolatey. Listen, I'm just procrastinating the next step because the next step is whisking again for 10 minutes. I'm gonna try actually for the next 10 minutes to switch up the whisking with some stirring with a spoon and see if that works better. But anyway, the next step is to mix in 2 eggs and 2 ounces of fine flour. Now it says it's like in one sentence like you're going to put them all in at the same time, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start with 1 egg, then a bit of flour, then the other egg, and then the other bit of flour, because I think that's going to be easier incorporated into this batter. 10 more minutes. I can do this. It's not been 10 minutes, gotta be honest here. It's been 7 minutes, but I can't. Got a cramp in my arm. can't whisk anymore. I've whisked as much as I can whisk. I apologize to my Victorian ancestors. I don't actually have any Victorian ancestors. My ancestors are from Italy. But never mind that now. Look at that. The texture of this is not quite like a brownie batter. It's more solid, it's more stiff than a brownie batter. Brownie batter would be a little bit more liquid. You know, when you pour a brownie batter into a cake tin, it almost spreads out by itself. This feels more like a cake batter. Is it airy enough? I'm not sure, but we'll find out. So the next step in the recipe just says bake in small cake tins for 20 minutes. It doesn't actually say how many cake tins, what size cake tins, or what temperature the oven is supposed to be. So I'm just going to fill up these muffin cases and then just add a sort of normal amount like I would add for a cupcake. Well, I'd probably add a little bit more because I know it's not going to rise much in the oven since it doesn't have any baking powder added. Okay, there we go. I ended up with 8 filled muffin tins. I'm now going to put them in the oven. We'll see if 20 minutes is the right amount of time. Obviously, it's impossible to say bake for 20 minutes without giving even the slightest idea of a temperature. But that was the reality in a Victorian kitchen. You couldn't necessarily heat the oven to the same temperature every single time. So the recipe expects a lot of experience from the person making the cakes to know what their oven is like, how hot or cold you need to make it in order for the 20-minute baking time to be correct. As I said before, I'm putting these in at 160 degrees fan, and I'm going to check back after 15 minutes. Okay, here we are, the cakes and Minerva. Well, actually, like, every time you're in my videos, it's just also Minerva.
Your
But
daddy's girl.
she's not getting any of the cakes.
Oh, daddy's girl, aren't you? Oh, you.
This is what they look like after 15 minutes of baking at 160 degrees fan assisted. You can see that they've actually risen. I did not expect this because obviously there's no baking powder in them. I expected them to stay pretty flat like brownies, but no, they have risen. Then after 15 minutes I checked them with a skewer test and they were cooked through. You're just looking at Minerva anyway. And now they're still slightly warm. So there's one for Bill, none for Minerva, because chocolate's not good for cats.
Smells fine.
Yeah, it smells like a cake. I had a look at them while they were baking through the oven door and they looked quite greasy. So I think they're quite high in fat, which hopefully helps soften them considering there's no baking powder in them. Alright, ready? They're brownies, right? They're not really cakes, they're brownies.
A little bit bland.
A little
Texture's a little bit weird. But they're alright.
You think texture's weird? I think texture's just like brownies.
It's not quite like brownies.
It really is though. In terms of flavour, they're very chocolatey, but I think for a 21st century palate, they're not quite sweet enough. Isn't that right?
Yep.
I think they're fine, but I don't really like my cakes too sweet anyway. But I noticed that it's a little bit less sweet than a modern day brownie or chocolate cake. It's really good though.
It's like the texture is slightly more eggy than your average brownie.
It's only yeah, maybe actually. It's only got 2 eggs in it though. It's not very high in eggs.
It's not as crumbly, and it's there's a slight rubberiness to it that I think is what I'm thinking of being slightly eggy.
Yeah, I don't think it's eggy, but it is a little bit more stodgy and rubbery. I have to admit, Bill, I didn't quite manage to whisk it for 20 minutes because my arm
It's terrible.
could not do it. I did not have Victorian levels of strength in my arms to whisk this for 20 minutes.
I certainly don't.
I quite like them. What I would do if you intend to replicate the recipe, first of all, add a pinch of salt, because this doesn't have any salt in the recipe at all. So add a little bit of salt and maybe add a little bit extra sugar if you know that you like your chocolate cakes on the sweet side.
Yeah, I think they would also go good, like, the sweetness they're at, if you just covered them in powdered sugar, you'd be having a good time. I reckon.
I mean, feel free, we've got powdered sugar, but it's not what it says in the recipe.
So if it's not Victorian, we can't eat it.
Well, that's quite. So that was me trying out a recipe from 1897.
I helped.
You helped, well done. And so did Minerva.
Can I go now?
Yes. Thank you for watching.
Bye.
Bye.